Hey, you're here. I'm glad you made it. Go on, settle in, just a little more. Pull that blanket right up to your chin if you like. Maybe there's a mug of tea somewhere on your nightstand, still warm enough to sip. Or maybe you just want to sink into the quiet hum of your own breathing. That's good too. Tonight, we're not talking about kings or battles or grand castles. No, not this time. Tonight, we're going to slip into the shadows that cling to old village lanes. The ones that people used to walk with a lantern in hand, half expecting something to leap out from behind a crumbling wall. We're going back to a time when people believed, truly, deeply, that the dead didn't always stay where you put them. Imagine that. Burying someone you loved, then lying awake night after night, convinced you'd hear their fingernails tapping at your window. Charming bedtime thought, I know. But don't worry. We're just here to wander among these old fears like curious guests, peeking behind dusty curtains and lifting the corner of an ancient grave cloth just to see what's there. So, let's start simple. Picture a tiny medieval village. The sun has just slipped below the horizon, leaving behind a bruised sky, streaked with violet and a hint of copper. Smoke curls up from thatched roofs, carrying the smell of burnt firewood and stew gone a bit too salty. You'd hear the distant bleat of sheep herded back into their pens, the low murmur of neighbors trading rumors before bolting the doors tight. Inside these humble cottages, people whisper tales to each other about the old woman buried last winter, the one whose grave was found disturbed, or the pale shape someone swore they saw standing at the edge of the forest, too tall to be a man, too silent to be alive. Mothers hush their children, tucking wool blankets under chins, promising garlic and crosses will keep the monsters away. Fathers mutter to themselves, staring into the dancing firelight, wondering if they should speak to the priest tomorrow, just in case. And you, here with me, tucked under your blanket, drifting between this world and that one. You're safe, of course. That's the trick of it. The fear, the stories, the scratching at the window, they're all just echoes now. Old bones under old stones, buried deep and heavy. Or so they hoped. So close your eyes if you want to. Let the flicker of torchlight and the creak of wooden doors lull you deeper into this strange corner of history. I'll be here, whispering all the while, and together we'll see how garlic, rusty chains, and a dash of paranoia kept the dead exactly where they belonged. At least, most of the time. Ready? Let's drift further in. Next, imagine you're standing at the edge of that village, the one we whispered about just a moment ago. It's dusk now, that strange inn, between hour when shadows stretch themselves long and the last crows flap noisily to roost. There's a hush settling over everything, like the land itself is holding its breath. You can almost feel the chill in the air. It's damp, clinging to your sleeves and the frayed hem of your cloak. The smell of wood smoke drifts past your nose, sweet and a little acrid. And if you listen carefully, you might catch the faint thud of an axe splitting the last bit of firewood for the night. Somewhere, a dog barks once, sharp and quick, then falls silent, ears cocked towards the dark. Now, wandering closer, there's a crooked lane that cuts through the village like a half-forgotten scar. It's muddy, pocked with puddles that catch the fading light like tiny mirrors. You'd have to pick your way carefully, boots squelching in the muck, pulling your cloak tight against the wind. A lantern swings from a post, its flame flickering and sputtering when a breeze picks up, a small, stubborn glow in the gathering gloom. You pass a cottage. Thin slats of light spill from a cracked wooden shutter. Inside, you'd see the shapes of people moving. A bent figure ladling stew into clay bowls. A mother combing lies from her daughter's hair by the hearth. The hiss and pop of logs burning low. The door is bolted tight, an iron latch scraped shiny from nervous hands. Over the lintel, bunches of dried herbs hang like tiny guardians. Rosemary, sage, and of course thick braided ropes of garlic. Always garlic. Sometimes, if you stood just outside, you'd hear the hush of whispered prayers. Words half, remembered, handed down from grandmothers who said them while planting turnips or stirring porridge. Each syllable meant to hold back the thing that might come scratching at the door long after the fire's gone out. Picture a villager, a burly man named Aldrich, maybe stomping through the lane now, clutching a pail of water. He pauses by the churchyard wall, glancing sidelong at the gravestones barely visible in the dusk. He crosses himself, muttering, as though the simple motion could pin the dead beneath the earth a little tighter. His boots slip in the mud, and for a heartbeat, he swears he sees something move, a hunched shape between the graves. But it's just a tree stump draped in mist. Or so he tells himself. He doesn't linger. No one does when the light goes. Further down the lane, children dart past you, bare feet splashing through puddles. They're laughing, chasing each other, voices sharp and bright. But when an old woman shouts for them to come inside, they scatter like sparrows, vanishing behind crooked doors that slam shut and rattle on rusty hinges. And the village exhales, a long, slow sigh as candles are snuffed and shutters latched. The world shrinks to what's within four walls. Beyond that, the dark belongs to things best left unspoken. Stories that the old men share by the ale barrel. Shadows that slither through the corners of dreams. Things that look like your lost uncle, but knock at your window with a smile that's all wrong. And you, yes you, you're safe for now. Here in this candlelit room in your mind, wrapped in a blanket, drifting deeper into this sleepy tale. There's a warmth to it, in its own strange way. The way fear binds people together. How the clink of a bolt sliding into place feels like a prayer answered. So close your eyes a little tighter, if you want. Listen for the distant creak of timber, the soft mutter of someone saying good night to the Virgin Mary, and the wind that rattles the shutters but never quite gets in. After all, as we drift further back, you'll see the fear of what lay beyond the grave made these villagers cling to each other like flickering flames against a sea of darkness. And that darkness, well, it's patient, but tonight it can wait a while longer. Shall we keep going? Next, let's wander beyond the last cottage, past the chickens roosting in their rickety coop, past the garden patch already black with frost. Let's slip through the narrow wooden gate that groans on its hinges, the one that guards the churchyard. This is where the dead should rest. Should. The ground here feels different under your feet. Softer, somehow, as though the soil remembers every secret ever buried in it. The air is damp, tinged with that raw, almost metallic smell of freshly turned earth, even when no one's been digging. Or so they say. By the church wall, the oldest graves lean like old drunks, stones weathered smooth, their inscriptions lost to moss and time. But look closer near the newer plots. You might see something odd. Heavy slabs of stone pinned over fresh mounds. Iron stakes driven deep, their rusty heads peeking through the grass like skeletal knuckles. Some graves are circled with iron chains, links blackened and stiff with rain. They look out of place, don't they? Picture a family gathered here at dawn, eyes swollen from a sleepless night, breath misting in the cold air. The father stands at the foot of the grave, hammer in hand, driving iron into soil as if pinning a beast beneath it. The mother scatters salt in little careful arcs, mumbling the words her own mother taught her. The youngest child clutches a sprig of garlic flowers, half for protection, half for the smell, perhaps to mask the rot that no one wants to think about. It might feel absurd to you now, all this iron and salt and garlic, all these chains draped like necklaces for the dead. But for them, this was hope. A promise that their loved ones would stay where they belonged. That when a rooster crowed at dawn, the earth wouldn't crack open and spill out something pale and hungry. Imagine crouching down beside one of these chain graves. Run your fingers along the cold iron links. Feel the slick chill of dew clinging to rust. If you press your ear to the stone, well, you won't hear anything, of course. But back then, some villagers swore you could hear the dead whispering under there. Scratching, gnawing, waiting for a loose clasp, a weak chain, a chance. Meanwhile, the priest pretends not to notice. The church frowned on such folk rituals. Iron and chains were superstition, the sort of thing they preached against on Sundays. But come nightfall, even the holiest man knew better than to scold a grieving widow hammering nails through a coffin lid. Faith and fear hand in hand. And it wasn't just iron. In some corners of Europe, they buried corpses face down. The idea being, if the dead did wake up, they'd dig deeper into the earth instead of clawing out. Clever, in a grim sort of way. There were stories of villagers driving long wooden stakes right through the heart before lowering the body in. A final, splintering promise. Don't come back. Can you picture the graveyard by moonlight? A field of crooked stones and half, sunken crosses. A whisper of wind brushing through dry grass, rattling the iron chains ever so slightly. A soft metallic chime that sounds too much like a warning bell. Above it all, the ancient church looms, its steeple cracked, the gargoyles crumbling into lumps of mossy stone. It's beautiful in its own cold way. A garden of fear, tended lovingly by people who just wanted to sleep soundly at night. So the next time you walk by an old graveyard, the kind with stones so worn they look like broken teeth in a jaw, look closer. You might see a strange length of chain half buried in the weeds, or a rusted stake leaning like a forgotten scarecrow. It's just history now, just relics. But once upon a time, these iron shackles were the last desperate defense between the living and the hungry dark. And you, my friend, you're safe under your blanket. The only thing rattling tonight is your mind wandering through these old bones and whispered stories. Sleepy yet? Good. There's so much more to see. Next, let's visit the uneasy dead themselves. Meanwhile, let's lean a little closer, shall we, into that uneasy space between what's buried and what refuses to stay buried. This is where the villagers' worst dreams lived, in the gap between a final breath and the chance that maybe, just maybe, that breath wasn't the end after all. Picture this, a family huddled around a heavy wooden table, the glow of a single tallow candle flickering against rough beams overhead. The father's voice is low, raspy from too many sleepless nights. He's telling the children about Uncle Henrik, how he was buried with a stone in his mouth to stop him from whispering secrets to the living. The little ones gasp wide-eyed, while the mother rolls her eyes but doesn't quite protest. Who can say, really? They believe the dead could turn restless for so many reasons. Maybe they've been cruel in life, a miser, a gossip, a man who hoarded bread while his neighbor starved. Or maybe they died too suddenly, a fever burning them up in 3 days flat. Souls with unfinished business, they'd mutter. You see, there was this quiet dread that the dead didn't like being unfinished any more than the living did. And so, the rituals multiplied. At dawn, a nervous son might check his father's grave, looking for signs. Disturbed earth, a cracked stone, a strange track of footprints leading to the door. If he found nothing, he'd breathe easier for a night or two. But if he did find something, well, that's when the real trouble began. Imagine the fear that would roll through the village like a cold fog. Women clutching their rosaries so tightly the beads left dents in their palms. Old men nodding gravely. muttering about the things they'd seen in their youth. Best dig 'em up, they'd say, just to be sure. You can almost hear the shovels scraping at midnight, the hush of prayers whispered too late, the sickly sweet smell of earth giving up what it was never meant to share again. And what do they find? Sometimes nothing strange, just a husk of what had been. But other times the corpse looked too full, too ruddy, mouth slick with dark blood. Of course, we know now that's just gas and decay, nature's slow work. But to them, proof. Proof that the soul was wandering, feeding, refusing to lie quiet. There's an old tale from a village, somewhere deep in the Carpathians, though who can really say where these stories are born? A young bride dies on a moonless night. They bury her in her wedding dress, lace yellowed with tears. But within a week, villagers claim they hear weeping near her grave. Her husband swears he sees her standing by the hearth, face pale as milk, eyes sunken but hungry. Desperate, they dig her up, and there she is, cheeks pink as if flushed from the cold, lips wet with what looked like fresh blood. They stake her heart, just to be safe. That night, the weeping stops. The husband sleeps for the first time in weeks. Peace at last, but only the kind hammered in place with iron and fear. Meanwhile, the priest stands by, candle dripping wax onto his boot, whispering Latin verses that tangle with old folk charms. Faith and superstition stitched together with rough thread. It makes you wonder, did they ever truly believe the prayers worked? Or was it the iron stake that calmed their hearts? Maybe a bit of both. Picture walking through the village the morning after. The earth around that grave still turned and muddy, the faint smell of burnt herbs lingering in the air like a bad dream. Children dare each other to run up and touch the headstone, squealing as they dash away. Mothers pretend not to look, but they always do. Everyone watches the grave for days, just in case. It's curious, isn't it? This idea that the dead could want something from us, not just our blood, but our attention, to be seen, even when they're meant to be silent. That's what made them uneasy, not just in their graves, but in the minds of those left behind. A ghost story woven into everyday chores, fetching water, feeding pigs, patching that hole in the thatch. Every cracked shutter or howling dog became a whisper that maybe someone wasn't quite at rest. And you, tucked in your bed, half drifting in the candlelit dark of this story, you can almost feel it, can't you? That cold breath at the back of your neck, the sense that someone might be standing just behind you. But it's only me here, keeping you company, making sure those old, restless souls stay exactly where they belong, tangled in words, pinned to the past. Sleep comes easier when the dead are uneasy somewhere else, don't you think? So stay warm under your blanket. Close your eyes if you dare. We've only just begun to scratch the surface. Next, let's eavesdrop on the villagers themselves, the gossip circle that kept these legends alive long after the graves had gone still. Next, let's wander back into the village, away from the graves for a moment, back to the warmth of flickering hearths and the crackle of gossip that filled the cracks in every cottage wall. You see, before books and newspapers and the cold certainty of science, the villagers had each other's whispers to make sense of the things they feared most. Picture them now, a handful of neighbors clustered near a low-burning fire. It's late, a time when chores are done, children snore under scratchy wool blankets, and the only sound is the hush of wind worrying at the shutters. But inside, voices rise and fall in that hush tone meant for secrets. Mugs of ale are clutched close to chests, the smell of yeast and smoke mingling in the air. Imagine old Marta, stooped, sharp-eyed, her hands knotted like the roots of the oak by the churchyard. She leans in, voice quavering but strong enough to slice through the smoky room. "I tell you, Thomas knocked on my window last night," she rasps. staring hard at the circle of faces, daring someone to doubt her. And Thomas, dead and buried these past 3 weeks after coughing up half a lung. He'd never been much liked when he was alive, always quick with a cruel word, a tight fist on his coin. So when Marta claims she saw his pale face peering through the grime, streaked glass, nobody laughs. Not really. They just shift uncomfortably, eyes darting to the shuttered window like they half expect to see Thomas press there now, his breath fogging the pain. Someone, maybe Gert, the blacksmith's wife, mutters about signs. The dog howling all night, the barn door found swinging open at dawn, the goose that keeled over for no reason at all. Little things, tiny crumbs that lead back to a single conclusion. The uneasy dead are stirring. Again, there's a dark comfort in the way these stories pass from one cracked lip to another. Gossip, you see, is its own sort of ritual. It binds people together like twine around a bundle of kindling, and the fear that glows inside them flickers brighter when they feed it with words. Picture a younger boy, maybe 12 or 13, hovering at the edge of the circle. His eyes are wide, fixed on Marta's gnarled hands as she describes Thomas's long fingernails tapping at the window. Tap, 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 like a beetle trapped in a jar. The boy shivers, pulling his threadbare cloak tighter, the rough wool prickling at his skin. Part of him wants to run back to his straw pallet, bury his head under the covers. But another part, the braver, darker part, wants to hear every detail, to carry the story to his friends tomorrow, to feel important because he knows something scary and secret. Meanwhile, the men exchange glances. Should they wait? Should they tell the priest? Should they gather by the grave tonight, shovels and lanterns in hand, just to see? Better safe than sorry, they murmur. Better to risk a bit of cold earth than wake to find Thomas's muddy footprints leading straight to Marta's door. Outside, the wind presses a loose shutter open for a heartbeat, just long enough for a cold gust to sweep through the room. The candle flame gutters, shadows stretch up the walls like bony fingers. A few people cross themselves, a nervous tick, a hinge between faith and folklore. The fire spits a spark that snaps in the dark, and for a breath, everyone falls silent, ears straining for a knock that never comes. But then someone coughs, the tension breaks, and the talk swells again, a different story this time. Old Lena's cousin swore he saw a pale figure near the mill pond last winter. Or the traveling merchant who claimed the next village overfound a corpse sitting upright in its coffin, grinning like it knew a joke no living man would dare to tell. It's ridiculous in a way, but not too ridiculous to ignore, because these stories feed the night. They bloom in the fertile dark between the known and the unknowable. They give shape to fears no priest can banish with a Latin prayer alone. And so they talk. They talk until the candle burns low, until the embers settle into a sleepy glow, until the children stirring in their beds whimper for their mothers to hush the voices down. And even then, the gossip lingers, thin as wood smoke, thick as blood. It'll cling to their tongues tomorrow, sweet as cider and bitter as grave dirt. Picture them now, this circle of neighbors with their cracked mugs, their worn boots resting on the packed earth floor. Their faces softening as the fire dwindles, eyelids heavy, heads nodding. Even old Marta sighs, folding her stories into the folds of her shawl, saving the worst ones for another night. And you're right here with them, safe behind your own locked door, tucked under your blanket while their whispers melt into your dreams. Funny how fear can feel so warm when you share it by the fire, isn't it? Rest easy, friend. The windows latch tight. The dead might knock, but tonight we won't open up. Next, let's slip into those tiny, private rituals families performed to keep their dearly departed exactly where they belonged. Next, let's peer through the cracks in the shutters of one of these cottages. Not the gossip circle now, but the quiet aftermath that comes when the fire has died down and the family is left alone with their grief and their fear. Imagine a small timber house, its walls patched with straw and clay, the floors swept clean but still dusted with the earthy scent of old boots and damp wool. There's a body laid out on a sturdy table, the same table where bread dough was kneaded that very morning, where children scraped bowls of barley porridge clean the day before. Now, that table holds someone they loved, a grandfather, maybe, with his chin tied shut by a strip of linen so his mouth won't gape open, as if trying to speak from the other side. They stand around him, close, breath misting in the cold room. Each pair of eyes is swollen from tears, but darting to the window, the door, the shadows that collect in the corners. You see, it's not just death that unsettles them. It's what comes after, or might come after. And so the little rituals begin. Picture the eldest son, clumsy fingers fumbling with a rusty sickle, the blade curved like a cruel smile. He lays it gently across his father's neck, edge facing down, a silent threat that if the corpse dares to stir, it'll cut itself clean through. A harsh image, but to them, it's not cruelty, it's kindness. A way to keep the old man's soul from drifting too far from God's light and tumbling into something hungry, something that might find its way back through the garden gate when the moon is high. Nearby, the mother scatters poppy seeds into the folds of the burial shroud. A handful here, another by the feet, a few tucked under the chin. Why poppy seeds? Because they say a restless spirit is obsessive. It can't resist counting. All night long, the uneasy dead will be busy picking over the seeds one by one, like a miser sorting coins. Dawn will come before the counting's done, and the door stays closed to whatever they become. There are other small gestures, too. Maybe a stone slipped under the tongue, a final, heavy word pressed down where no more words should ever come, or a coin placed in the palm, fingers curled tight around it. An offering for the ferryman, just in case the soul loses its way and needs safe passage to wherever peace waits. Picture this moment. The youngest daughter, no more than 6, leans over the stiffening body to tuck a sprig of garlic flowers near his collar. It's all she knows to do, a child's version of protection. She likes the smell, in a way, sharp and clean, a promise that what sleeps on this table will stay asleep beneath the soil. Later, after the body is laid in its simple pine box, the family will hammer the lid shut themselves. No carpenter needed when the stakes are so high. If they're lucky, a priest might come and mumble a few Latin verses, incense curling in the frigid air like a ghost that's learned to mind its manners. But the real defense? That's the garlic, the seeds, the sickle's kiss of steel. It's not just the dead they fear. It's the slow worry that grief itself can call the dead back. That if you weep too loud, if you cling too tight, your sorrow might tangle around their feet and pull them up through the damp earth to stand weeping at your window. So they hush their tears as best they can, pressing palms to mouths, letting salt and snot wet their fingers instead of the corpse's ears. Once the coffin is lowered into the ground, the grave dug shallow enough to watch for signs, deep enough to muffle any scratching, the family might slip away before dusk, refusing to look back. They say the dead hate to be watched. They say an ill-placed glance might tether the soul to this world, like a chicken tied to a stake, pacing a circle it can't break. And so the small, strange gestures continue from house to house, family to family. Different herbs, different prayers, different whispered bargains with the darkness. Tiny barriers built by trembling hands. And you, still here, breathing softly in the dark, warm under your covers. You can almost see them, can't you? Those cold, muddy churchyards scattered with garlic blossoms and poppy seeds that the wind will carry away by spring. By then, the villagers will feel safe again, believing they've done enough. Enough iron, enough salt, enough secrets shared behind locked shutters. But tonight, as you drift just a little closer to sleep, remember this. For every grave they sealed, every mouth they stuffed with stones, they left behind a story. And stories, as you know by now, never stay buried for long. Close your eyes. Breathe in the smell of earth, garlic, old wood smoke. Drift deeper. Next, listen for the howls that echo through the night. The animals who sense what no living man dares to see. Next, hush for a moment. Listen, not to me, but to the sounds that drift through these crooked village lanes when the moon is just a thumbprint of silver, hanging behind clouds like a spy. If you stand still, really still, you'll hear them. The animals always know first. Imagine it. A skinny dog, ribs like the barrel staves in your father's shed, nose pressed to the air just beyond the churchyard wall. Its hackles bristle, tail low and stiff as a broken twig. It lets out a whimper, then a howl, long and mournful, the sort of sound that makes a mother clutch her children tighter to her breast. Because everyone knows a dog that howls at a grave is warning you. Something down there isn't finished. Or picture the family's black cat. Always the black cat, isn't it? Perched on the cottage threshold. Its pupils flare wide as it watches a patch of dark near the garden gate. You see nothing, but the cat's tail lashes the packed earth floor like a whip, claws kneading the frozen dirt. When it hisses, the sound is sharp enough to raise goosebumps on your arms. You swear the temperature dips a touch colder, as if something just brushed past you that shouldn't be here at all. The villagers lean hard on these signs, little omens wrapped in fur and feathers. They believe animals live closer to the edges of the world, just a heartbeat from the realm of spirits. A cockerel that crows at the wrong hour? A murder of crows perched on a roof just after a burial? An owl hooting thrice by your window? Each tiny event makes the stories crawl under your skin, raising the short hairs on the back of your neck. Imagine the poor milk cow, stabled behind the cottage, warm breath turning to mist in the cold. One winter's night, it kicks at its stall door, eyes rolling white, refusing to settle. The farmer mutters a prayer under his breath, tracing a rough cross on the barn wall with a chalky fingertip. But in his mind, the thought takes shape anyway. The restless dead have come sniffing round the farm. And there's always that sound, scratching at the shutters, a branch rapping the roof tiles when no wind blows. Did you hear it? Of course, it's just the house creaking. You tell yourself, the timbers settling in the frost. But a half-mumbled tale about the village up the road. The one where the dead were found sitting up in their coffins, heads lolling like broken dolls, has already lodged itself behind your ribs. You see, these signs never come alone. They bring gossip, then suspicion, then the old rituals again. The dog that howled at a grave last night? If it keeps at it, the villagers might gather at dawn, eyes bleary, boots caked in mud, whispering about the last funeral, the black cat that hissed when the coffin was lowered. And then the shovel. Always the shovel. Picture a line of men, hunched against the cold, breath fogging like ghosts, lanterns bobbing in the gloom. At the front, the priest, whether he believes or not, clutches his crucifix so hard his knuckles go pale. The air near the grave is colder than the rest of the churchyard. Or maybe it just feels that way because the howling hasn't stopped all night. When they reach the plot, the dog slinks off into the dark, tail tucked low, duty done. The villagers stare at the mound of earth. No footprints, no disturbance. But the cat's still there, perched on the headstone, eyes like twin embers. Someone coughs, someone else mutters they'd best not tempt fate. But you know how this ends. The spade bites in. Damp soil gives way. Every scrape, and thunk echoes in the still air. Sometimes, of course, they find nothing, just a body rotting the way bodies do. The priest wipes his brow. The dog curls up by the hearth again, and everyone swears they were foolish to listen to the animals. But when they do find something, a corpse turned over in its grave, mouth full of dark blood, skin flush, as if from a night's feed, then the signs were never just signs, were they? They were warnings. And next time, they'll trust the howl sooner. It's strange, isn't it? How animals become the guardians between this world and whatever claws at its edges. Maybe it's because they have no words, no gossip to muddy the fear, no prayers to half believe in. Just a sharp ear, a twitch of whiskers, a howl that curdles the blood and tells you, don't look out the window tonight. So tuck yourself deeper under your blanket, my friend. Pretend you don't hear the wind worrying at your own shutters. Let the cat keep watch. In this story, it's her job. Close your eyes. Breathe in the straw, scented night, the soft creak of timbers settling around you. The animals are restless, but you're safe right here. Next, let's see what happens when the priest himself picks up a spade and joins the fearful, a man of faith, forced to get his hands dirty to quiet the uneasy dead. Next, imagine this. A man of God, robes cinched tight against the chill, crucifix swinging softly on his chest, trudging down a muddy lane at midnight, lantern in hand. That's not the image you get from stained glass windows, is it? But in the sleepy corners of medieval villages, faith wasn't just candlelight and gentle hymns. Sometimes it meant standing ankle deep in cold graves, breathing in the sweet, cloying rot of old sins. Picture him now, Father Gerhardt, we'll call him. He's been the village priest for 20 years. He's seen babies squeal their first breath beneath the church roof, blessed marriages that lasted longer than the roof's thatch, wept with mothers who buried more than they birthed. He's delivered the words of the book every Sunday, reminded these people that the Lord alone holds dominion over life and death. But tonight, he clutches a rusted spade with white-knuckled fingers, and the Latin verses tremble on his lips. The villagers swarm around him like anxious crows, cloaks pulled tight, eyes flicking between the grave and the sky, as if hoping dawn will break early and save them from this. They've come to him pleading, "Father, please." The howling won't stop. Marta swears she heard scratching. You know the signs. We must look. And so, with a sigh that fogs the chill air, the priest agrees. He's not sure where his faith ends and theirs begins. Maybe they're the same thing now, knotted together in the dark like old rosary beads. He knows the church forbids superstition, scolds charms and garlic and whispers of the restless dead. But what can dogma do when old Marta stands at his door in the snow, hair wild, eyes wide, begging him to keep her children safe? The lantern casts a sickly yellow glow across the graveyard. The gravestones loom like crooked teeth, shadows dancing over carved angels whose faces have been smudged by centuries of wind and rain. The grave they stand before is fresh, dirt piled high, just 10 days past, the memory of weeping still caught in the trampled grass. Father Gerhardt mumbles a prayer, thumb brushing the cold iron of his cross. But it's the villagers who press the spade into his hand. He hesitates, looking down at the mound. The soil is heavy and wet, clumps sticking to the blade with a sucking noise that seems far too loud for this hour. The men take turns, shoulders hunched, backs straining. The women stand back, muttering, garlic beads clutched in sweaty palms. And as they dig deeper, there's that moment. The pause. The air feels thick, like the grave itself is breathing. A shift of wind brings the scent of turned earth, sharp and damp. Father Gerhardt feels it, the cold tickle of dread crawling up his spine, slipping under the collar of his robe. When the coffin finally emerges, the wood is already dark with moisture, nails rusted at the edges. The priest leans in, his breath held, thumb tracing the sign of the cross over and over until it's just a nervous twitch. A crow caws somewhere in the dark, sharp, mocking. Someone shushes it with a hiss, as if a bird could carry tales back to the other side. The lid is pried open with trembling hands. The lantern's light spills inside, and there it is. The corpse. Old Thomas or Henrik, or maybe it's just another unlucky soul whose sins refuse to stay buried. Sometimes the face is sunken and harmless. Sometimes the skin is bloated, lips slick with dark, syrupy blood. Father Gerhardt knows now. Science calls it gas, decay, pressure pushing fluids out. But back then, all he sees is proof that the stories are true. He closes his eyes for a heartbeat, whispers, "Lord have mercy." But mercy isn't what the villagers want. They want finality, assurance. And so he nods once, a weary blessing, and steps back as the men drive a stake through the heart. The dull thud of wood splitting flesh, the muffled crunch of bone. It all echoes under the watchful stone saints perched along the church walls. When it's done, they scatter salt in the coffin, tuck garlic beneath the chin, sprinkle holy water until the earth itself seems to steam with the mingling of fear and faith. The lid slams shut again. The grave is filled, the mound patted down with care. By dawn, the only sign that anything happened is the churned mud around the headstone and the silence. The howling has stopped. The animals curl up by hearths again. The children sleep without whimpering. And Marta, clutching her shawl, thanks the priest with cracked lips. Father Gerhardt walks home alone. The crucifix hangs heavy on his chest now, heavier than any shovel he's ever carried. He knows the bishop would scold him, but what does the bishop know of cold graves and the dead who scratch at shutters? He pauses by the church door, looks back at the graveyard one last time. The wind tugs at his robes like a child needing comfort. Rest now, he whispers into the dark. To the corpse? To himself? Maybe both. Then he slips inside, bolts the door, and warms his hands over a candle that flickers in the draft. You see, even the holiest among them sometimes needed iron, garlic, and soil under their fingernails to feel the shape of their faith. Because when the restless dead stirred, no sermon alone could keep them down. So breathe easy now. You won't find your priest at the pulpit tonight. You'll find him in the graveyard, lantern swinging, prayers tumbling from his lips like breadcrumbs for the souls who can't find their way home. Rest, my friend. Close your eyes a little heavier. The grave is filled again for now. But tomorrow? Well, tomorrow is always hungry. Next, let's slip deeper to where blades flash in moonlight and desperate hands do what they must. The grim work of dismemberment and decapitation. Next, let's not flinch from it. This dark corner where fear grows sharp enough to swing an axe. Because in these lonely villages, faith and folklore didn't just rely on garlic or salt or whispered prayers. Sometimes, when all else failed, they turned to the blade. Picture it. A shallow grave under a moon the color of tarnished pewter. Frost clings to the grass like a thin lace veil. A line of villagers stands around the open earth, breath clouding, eyes hollow from nights spent listening to the tap, tap, tap at the shutter, the soft hush of footsteps that shouldn't exist. A man kneels at the edge. His boots sink into the churned mud, the toes dark with grave water. His hands tremble around the handle of a rust-flecked spade, but he keeps digging because the scratching hasn't stopped. He's tried it all. Poppy seeds, a sickle across the throat, iron chains draped like jewelry for the dead. Still, the dog howls. Still, the children wake weeping, claiming they see grandfather peering through the window. So tonight, it comes to this. No charm, no prayer, just steel. Imagine the coffin when they crack it open, wood swollen from damp, hinges squealing like something alive. The corpse inside might look almost peaceful if you blur your eyes, but the villagers stare too long. They see the dark blood pooled at the corners of the mouth, the nails grown into clawed curls, the body turned in its shroud as if it wriggled there in secret. The smell is sweet, rotten, the breath of the grave mixed with the copper bite of something too fresh to be innocent. They mutter prayers, but their voices wobble, more habit than hope. The priest stands back this time. Maybe he said all the Latin he knows, or maybe he can't bear to watch. So the shovel gives way to an axe, its blade nicked and dull from splitting firewood, now turned to split bone. The eldest son steps forward. He wipes his brow with a sleeve, mud streaking across his temple like war paint. He raises the axe high, breath caught between his ribs. The night holds its breath too. Every cricket, every owl gone silent. Then the blade comes down, a dull thock, a jolt through the handle that buzzes up into his teeth. Once, twice, until the head rolls free, eyes half, open, lips parted as if about to speak one final, awful secret. They lift the head gingerly. No one wants to hold it for long. Some wrap it in linen, others bury it between the corpse's feet. In other villages, they wedge the head beneath an armpit or set on the grave marker, facing away from the village. The logic is simple and cruel. If the dead should rise, they'll stagger off in the wrong direction, forever lost between worlds. Sometimes they burn the head. Picture the flicker of flame in a graveyard's dark mouth. Shadows dancing across crooked crosses, the smell of scorched hair clinging to the mist. There's a kind of comfort in the finality of fire. Ash doesn't knock at windows. Ash doesn't scratch at doors. It's grisly, yes, but to them, it was mercy. Better the blade than the endless fear. Better a clean cut than sleepless nights spent waiting for a cold hand to brush the cheek of a child sleeping too close to the window. And these were not isolated acts. They were traditions, passed down in hush stories shared around fires. Imagine a young girl, wide-eyed, listening to her grandmother describe how, when she was a child, the men dug up a cousin who wouldn't stay quiet. She remembers the blood steaming in the winter air, the soft thud of the head landing in a burlap sack. Years later, she repeats the tale to her own children, not to scare them, but to teach them how to keep the peace of the village from slipping into something far worse than grief. Meanwhile, the grave is covered again. The villagers shuffle home, boots squelching through ruts of churned mud and ash. No one speaks. They'll rinse the axe in the icy stream behind the church, hang it on its hook in the barn, and pretend it's just for kindling. Picture the family that night, curled under blankets that still smell of garlic and wood smoke. The children dream of rustling skirts and cold lips, but the dreams are softer now, fading with the flicker of the hearth. The parents keep watch by the shutter a while longer, ears straining for any tap or whisper. When none comes, they let themselves doze, limbs tangled, breath warm and human in the dark. And you, tucked here with me, wandering through these damp graveyards in your mind, you're safe. No restless dead to knock at your door, no axe to swing in the frozen dirt. Just the soft hush of your own heartbeat, steady and warm. Close your eyes a little tighter. Let the stories of blades and moonlit graves slip beneath your lids. The villagers rest easier tonight. The dead, for now, sleep headless and silent. But tomorrow? Who knows? Some secrets never stay buried. Next, what happens when even the blade fails? When the dead refuse to lie still? Even after iron, salt, and a cruel cut? We'll wander into that grim dawn together. Next, imagine the sky just beginning to pale, that strange hour when the frost clings to the thatch and the air tastes sharp enough to cut your tongue. The villagers stand at the edge of the graveyard once more, boots crusted in last night's mud, eyes raw from too many sleepless hours. You'd think they'd rest easy now, wouldn't you? After the iron chains, the poppy seeds, the sickle, the stake, and yes, even the blade. But fear is stubborn. It breeds new shadows, even as the old ones rot away. Picture old Marta again, shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, pointing a crooked finger at the fresh mound of earth. "It's turned," she whispers. The others shuffle closer, and sure enough, they see it. A shallow dip in the soil, as though something inside shifted, pushing the dirt from within. They cross themselves, lips cracked with whispered prayers that taste like salt and dread. There's a boot print too, or so someone claims, a shape half, hidden by the frost, the suggestion of a heel pressed into the churn mud. Of course, you could blame the dog, the rain, the restless boots of the living. But once that seed of doubt roots itself, it never dies. So they gather again. Lanterns swing on rusted hooks, casting sickly halos on crooked gravestones. The wind rattles through the bare churchyard trees, making branches tap, tap, tap on marble crosses, a soft percussion that keeps time with their heartbeat. The priest comes, slower this time. He mutters under his breath that it shouldn't be this way. The soul is gone, he says. It's only flesh now. But he carries his crucifix tighter, a lump in his throat that no Latin hymn can swallow down. The men dig. Shovels scrape against damp soil. Metal bites against stones that thunk in the frozen ground. When the coffin emerges, you'd swear the world itself holds its breath. A silence so thick you feel it pressing into your ears. The lid creaks open, and what they find makes the bravest among them flinch back into the shadows. The corpse, headless just nights before, is twisted in its shroud, shoulders turned, as if trying to stand even without its eyes to guide it. Fingers curled, mouthless neck weeping a slow black stain into the wood. Some swear they hear a sigh, just a trick of wind and cold, but enough to make a man drop his lantern. What do you do when the dead refuse to lie still, even after the blade? Some villages turn to fire, the final purifier. They haul the coffin up, muscles straining, breath steaming in the chill. A pit is dug away from the graves, far enough that the stench won't cling to the church walls. Wood is stacked, dry kindling stolen from winter stores. Picture the body laid across the pyre, linen shroud still clinging to it like a second soiled skin. The flames catch slow, licking at the edges, sparks drifting up like fireflies that carry secrets into the black dawn. The smell is thick and greasy, fat and cloth, and something sweet that makes the stomach twist. A few villagers retch behind their sleeves, but no one looks away. They need to see it burn. They need to believe the smoke will carry the restless soul far enough that it can't find its way back. Some scoop up the ashes afterward, scattering them at a crossroads. The old belief that a wandering spirit will get lost at the fork, doomed to circle forever where paths split and twist. Others bury the remains beneath a heavy stone, or toss handfuls into the river so the current can carry what's left into the belly of the earth. And when it's done, when the last ember flickers out and the sun finally crawls up over the distant hills, the village breathes again. Cautious, shallow breaths at first, like children peeking from under blankets after a nightmare. But it doesn't take much to stir the fear again. A dog's bark in the night, a cold breeze that rattles the shutter loose, the shape of a branch scratching against the window, looking too much like a hand you've seen before. And somewhere, deep in their hearts, they know, no matter how many stakes you drive, how many heads you take, how many flames you feed, some stories simply refuse to die. Because this isn't just about a corpse, is it? It's about the part of the human soul that cannot stand the unfinished. The guilt, the grief, the questions that haunt the living long after the burial bell stops ringing. Picture the villagers trudging home after the fire. Smoke still curls from the blackened pit, the taste of ash clinging to their tongues. They pull their children close, touch door frames with trembling fingers, mumble a final prayer before bolting the latch shut. For tonight, they believe they've done enough. They have to. And you, here in the quiet dark with me, you can almost smell the wood smoke, the acrid tang of fear cooked into the dawn. But you're warm where you are, tucked into your blankets, every window latched tight. The dead may scratch, but they won't find you here. Not tonight. Rest easy. The village sleeps at last, though no one will say for how long. Next, let's wander to the edge of true catastrophe, when plague sweeps through and the terror of restless corpses spreads faster than any sickness ever could. Next, let's drift to a time when the air itself seemed to carry death in every breath. Picture a village, not much different from the one we've wandered through already. Same thatched roofs, same church bell that tolled through the mist. But now the bell tolls so often it's become part of the wind, a dull, constant knell that weighs on every ear. This is plague time. A cough behind the shutter could mean an entire family gone before the next sunrise. Fear slips into the bone, heavier than any frost. Food spoils in baskets untouched. Animals wander loose in the lanes because their keepers are dead, or nearly. And with each grave dug hurriedly, too many, too shallow, comes the same old terror, reborn under a new name. The fear that the dead might be rising to drink from the living. It's strange, isn't it? You'd think a village so racked by pestilence would be too tired, too broken to care what happens after the soul slips away. But the more they buried, the more they whispered. It isn't just the sickness, there's something else. Picture a row of graves, raw earth clotted with mud and bramble. No time for proper stones or prayers. Men with cloths tied over their faces. Not because they understand disease, but because they can smell what the dead are doing in the dark. Sometimes a burial party cracks open a coffin, maybe to make space for another body. And what do they find? A corpse bloated, skin flushed red, mouth slick with a dark stain that looks far too much like fresh blood. We know now, you and I, sitting here in the safe warmth of the present, that this is just rot, gases, the grim alchemy of decay. But to them, it was proof. Proof that the dead were feasting below the earth, gnawing at their shrouds, feeding on the marrow of their kin. And if they could do it once, who's to say they wouldn't claw up through the soil and do it again under the silver eye of the moon? Picture the panic that spreads even faster than the plague. Neighbors turn on neighbors. Old Marta's brother died just yesterday, but didn't you see her lantern flickering at his grave last night? And why is her cow dry this morning? The village whispers she's feeding him, keeping him strong under the dirt so he can rise again, slip between the doors that never quite shut. There's an account, half legend, half scribbled in the shaky Latin of an exhausted monk, of a village where an entire family was exhumed, one by one, their corpses decapitated, hearts torn out, and burned on the cold stone of the church steps. The villagers said it was the only way to stop the wasting sickness that stole breath after breath. And sometimes it worked, or seemed to. The death toll slowed. The howls at the churchyard fence fell silent. Hope flickered like a dying candle. But deep down they knew it wasn't just disease they were fighting, but something older, something rooted in the soil itself. Something that couldn't be carved away with a surgeon's blade or chased off with prayers. Can you see it? The strange comfort they found in such brutality? When everything else spun out of control, when no doctor's poultice or priest's blessing could hold back the black buboes rising on your neck. The axe, the stake, the fire gave them the illusion of power. Better to tear a corpse apart than wait to see it tapping your shutter, lips red with a hunger that no plague could match. Meanwhile, the church tried to stamp it out. Bishops wrote scolding letters, called the rituals pagan, backward, shameful. But they weren't the ones with shallow graves in their fields, or mothers waking to find their child's cradle empty and the door ajar. Fear is louder than any sermon. And so, behind the church walls that reeked of incense, you'd find villagers whispering in the dark, clutching garlic beads in one hand and rosaries in the other, hoping one might work if the other failed. When the plague finally ebbed, leaving behind rows of skulls stacked like forgotten harvests, the stories stayed. You'd think they would fade, these tales of plague vampires, but they sank deep into the village memory like water into dry earth. And every time a sickness came again, a cough, a rash, a fever that didn't break, the old fear cracked open like a grave disturbed. Picture the sun coming up after such a night, a dawn that should bring warmth but feels thin and brittle. The graveyard is quiet, the fresh mounds patted down smooth again. No sign of the frantic digging, the burning, the whispered bargains struck with the darkness. The villagers blink into the pale light, huddled together on muddy paths. They're exhausted, reeking of sweat and ash, but for now, they believe the dead will rest. And you, drifting here with me, wrapped in your own warmth while their cold dread curls at the edges of your mind, you're safe. That's the strange comfort, isn't it? To wander these graveyards from afar, to trace a fingertip through centuries of panic and never feel the dirt under your nails. So hush your breath. Let your eyelids grow heavier. The plague vampires, too, are quiet now, at least for tonight. Next, we'll lean in close to see the proof that convinced so many. The bodies that bloated, the hearts that bled, the mouths that dripped secrets the living never wanted to hear. Stay with me. There's more waiting beneath the earth. Next, let's lean in closer. Yes, closer still, to the cold, strange evidence that made so many souls swear they'd seen the devil's work with their own eyes. The so-called proof that the dead, it seemed, would not stay dead. Picture a graveyard at dawn, the frost still crisp on every blade of grass, each stone cross slick with dew. A handful of villagers stand hunched around a fresh dug hole, boots sinking into churned earth, fingers raw from a night spent clenching shovels instead of rosaries. They're not looking for treasure or gold teeth to pry from skulls. They're hunting for signs, and signs they find. The coffin lid creaks open with that horrible groan of what's swollen by rain. The lantern flame flutters, casting a soft, sickly light into the box. And there it is, the corpse, lying too easily as though it's only pretending. The villagers hold their breath. One mother presses a cloth to her nose, but the smell still seeps in, sour and sweet, that rank perfume of decay that never lets you forget you're standing on the threshold between life and whatever waits beyond. Look closer. The skin, it's not gray and sunken like they'd expect. Instead, it's plump, flushed, cheeks dark with a ruddy hue that mocks the living, as if the grave itself had been feeding the body with secrets it shouldn't keep. The hair looks longer, the nails curled out like claws. But worst of all, the mouth. A smear of something black, tar-thick, stains the lips and pools at the corners. Someone leans closer, half expecting the corpse to whisper. Instead, there's only the dull drip of fluid down the side of the shroud. To you and I, it's nothing more than the slow work of rot, the gases and pressure that push out what the body can no longer hold. But to them, it's evidence. A vampire's feast. Imagine a farmer, wide-eyed, crossing himself so hard he nearly bruises his own collarbone. "It's been feeding," he hisses. The others nod like birds pecking at seeds. No one wants to be the fool who doubts. They see what they see. The dead must be slipping out from under the soil, wandering lane to lane, pressing cracked lips to the necks of sleeping children. Picture a priest, if he's there, swallowing the word decomposition before it ever leaves his lips. Science is too thin an armor out here. Easier to reach for the stake and the ash. He mumbles a prayer instead, Latin dribbling from his tongue like water through a cracked bucket. Sometimes they find the heart swollen, dark as wine. That's the real prize, the traitor organ. They cut it out with hands that tremble but don't stop. Lay it on a flat stone, rough, pockmarked, cold as a sinner's promise. The oldest man in the circle leans in with flint and steel, strikes a spark that catches on dry straw. The heart hisses, bubbles, spits blood into the fire like a curse. They watch the smoke coil into the dawn sky, hoping it will carry the restless soul with it. Up and away, past the eaves of the church, over the bramble hedges and crooked fence posts, out beyond the horizon where no window waits to be tapped at in the dead of night. Picture this small, desperate comfort. The villagers gather the ashes in cupped hands, scatter them at crossroads, or toss them into the rushing stream that winds past the edge of the fields. There's an old belief, older than the church, older than any written word. That water cleanses what fire cannot finish. And so the heart's ghost drifts away in a current that knows no path back. But the mind clings to the details, doesn't it? The way the corpse's lips looked slick and wet, the fingernails grown long as thorns. When the wind rattles the shutters a week later, old Marta will swear she sees that same mouth grinning through the glass. And maybe, just maybe it really does. Fear makes its home in the soft parts of the brain, nestles under the ribs, beats in time with the heart you hope won't betray you next. It's easy to dismiss them now, these villagers in their damp boots and garlic necklaces, but stand there a moment longer, in the cold stink of that open grave, staring at a body that should be dry and still but isn't. The flicker of doubt feels warm, like a candle cupped between numb hands. If you lived back then, with your child coughing in the next room, your neighbor's ox found dead in the field, the priest's prayers ringing hollow in your ears, wouldn't you want to believe there's something you can do? You'd swing the shovel too. You'd peer into that box of secrets, looking for blood where there should be none. You'd see the proof you need, the story that makes sense of the terror. And when the heart cracks and sizzles on the coals, you'd let yourself sleep again, at least for a night or two. And you, here with me, drifting warm beneath your blanket, the only grave you'll visit tonight safe inside your imagination. You can let the old fear curl like smoke around your thoughts. It won't reach you here. The dead are quiet now. The proof has burned to ash. Close your eyes. Let the flicker of lantern light fade behind your lids. Next, we'll slip back to the flicker of candle flames in small cottages, where folk rituals twist like ivy around faith, the last line of defense against the creeping dark. Don't worry, I'll keep watch while you dream. Next, imagine leaving that cold graveyard behind for a moment. The churned soil, the heart turned to ash, the sigh of wind slipping through broken headstones. Let's step back through the crooked gate, down the muddy lane, past the barn where the ox lies still, to a cottage window where a single candle burns low. Inside, the room is small and close, its air thick with the scent of tallow and damp wool. The walls breathe a soft crackle, the old beams groaning as the frost outside curls its icy fingers along the thatch. But within these four walls, the living gather shoulder to shoulder, a bulwark against whatever might press its nose to the shutter tonight. Picture them, the family huddled on rough stools, cloaks drawn tight, faces flickering gold and shadow. In the center, the mother bends low over the table, a battered plank rubbed smooth by generations of bread dough and spilt broth. But tonight, there's no bread, no soup, just a small scattering of curious charms. Dried rosemary sprigs, knots of garlic braided with coarse string, and scraps of parchment marked with spidery symbols inked by a hand that never learned to write much else. A hush hangs in the room, broken only by the soft drip of wax down the candle's side, the hiss as it pools and hardens on the table. The mother picks up a tiny bag, a leather pouch so worn it looks more like a shadow than a thing. She opens it with trembling fingers, pours its contents, poppy seeds, salt crystals, maybe a single iron nail, onto the parchment. She mutters words her grandmother taught her, syllables older than the priest's Latin, older than the church that stands crooked on the hill. Can you hear it? The chant is more breath than sound. It slips through the room like warm smoke, curling under the rafters, nestling around the ears of children who stare wide-eyed, fingers tangled in the fringes of their mother's skirt. They've seen too much for their tender years. The fever that took their brother, the shadow that passed the window when the rooster should have been crowing. This little ritual is a lullaby for them, a promise that their mother's fear is stronger than any restless spirit's hunger. Sometimes there's a bowl of water on the table, black as ink in the candlelight. They drop a piece of iron into it, watch the ripples twist and shiver. If the water settles smooth, they say the soul is quiet, the grave heavy with sleep. But if the ripples dance long after the iron sinks, well, that means someone will dig come morning. Picture the father, heavy-shouldered and rough-handed from long days in the fields. He reaches for the garlic, plates another braid with knotted fingers, and hangs it over the doorframe. Not for flavor. No one will taste that garlic until the frost breaks, but for safety. They believe its bite wards off teeth sharper than any wolf's. Then there's the candle itself. So simple, so fragile. Yet its flicker holds back a darkness that feels thick enough to choke. Some families let the candle burn down to the nub, pinching the wick at the last moment, saving the stub for the next burial. A stub like that, they say, laid on the chest of the newly dead, can weigh the spirit down, keep it pinned beneath the earth's cold blanket. Sometimes they carve a symbol into the door, 3 crooked crosses, or a mark that looks more like a bird's foot than a blessing, scratched deep with the tip of a knife or the stub of a burned stick. These symbols don't come from any holy book. They come from the hush of fields at dusk, from the half-remembered dreams of old women who've buried too many to trust in prayers alone. Meanwhile, the priest would scold them if he knew, call it heresy, devil's work. But he doesn't sit up all night listening to the shutters rattle or the dog's howl grow long and low beneath the window. He doesn't tuck his children into the same straw mattress where the fever took their sister last winter. He doesn't see the face pressed to the glass at dawn, the eyes hollow, and mouth moving like it still remembers the taste of bread and blood. So the villagers do what they must. They press the parchment to the lintel, scatter poppy seeds across the hearthstones, tuck sprigs of rosemary into the bedclothes. These tiny acts, so trivial by day, swell huge in the candlelight. They give shape to the shapeless, names to the nameless. And when the wind brushes the thatch like a hand through hair, the family huddles closer. The father rests a rough palm on the mother's shoulder. The mother pulls the children in tight. The candle flickers, bends, but never quite dies. You, tucked into your own safe darkness, listening to these old secrets. You can almost feel the warmth of that tiny flame, can't you? Smell the acrid garlic, the sweet, resinous sting of burning herbs. The hush of the chant settles around your ribs like a blanket stitched with every fear and every stubborn hope that the dead will stay where they're meant to. So let the flame glow soft behind your eyes. Let the candle burn down. Let the symbols guard your threshold. The night is long, but the villagers have done all they can. What's left now is sleep, or the nearest thing to it in a world that never fully trusts its own dead. Next, let's peer at the garlic obsession in daylight. How this simple kitchen bulb became a talisman against the dark, a pungent promise that the monsters of the graveyard would stop at the door. Don't worry, I'll keep whispering. The flame stays with us. Next, let's wander from the hush of candlelight rituals into the heart of the medieval cottage, the kitchen. A place that should smell of warm bread and sweet cider, but instead hums with something sharper, garlic. So much garlic you can almost taste it on the back of your tongue. Even here, centuries later, picture a bundle of it, fat bulbs knotted together with twine, hanging from the blackened rafters like pale, papery fruit. The mother ties it there with hands red from scrubbing turnips clean of dirt. Each clove holds a promise. The promise that the thing scratching at the shutter, the thing whispering through the keyhole, will hesitate at the threshold and turn back to the cold. Garlic wasn't just an ingredient back then. It was armor. It was rumor and ritual bundled together, pungent and sharp as a priest's rebuke. Villagers hung it above doors, stuffed it into the eaves, rubbed it along the windowsill until the oil left a ghostly film that glowed faintly in the candlelight. Even the children wore cloves on thin leather cord around their necks, tiny, stinking amulets pressed to their skin so they'd stink sweeter to the living than to whatever prowled in the graveyards by moonlight. Imagine old Marta again. Every tale needs her, doesn't it? She's bent over her mortar and pestle, pounding the cloves to a paste, adding salt until it forms a gritty sludge. With this, she smears the lintel above her door, the hinges the lock. She mutters as she works, a chant half forgotten but sharp on the tongue. Next door, her neighbor laughs behind her hand. What good is garlic against a corpse? But you can bet she rubs her own door down before the night is done. Fear is catching that way, and it's not just the doors. In some places, they'd open the grave before the coffin was lowered, tuck garlic right into the mouth of the dead, push the cloves deep between the teeth, hoping the sharp taste would keep them busy chewing through bitterness instead of clawing through soil. Some stuffed garlic into the corpse's pockets, or pressed it under the tongue where coins once lay for the ferryman. Better stinking breath than no breath at all. They'd murmur, the irony sour on their lips. There are records, real, brittle parchment tucked away in dusty church ledgers, of garlic being planted in rings around graveyards like living fences. Imagine it. Rows upon rows of green shoots poking through the frost, circling old tombstones, the earth between the mounds laced with that sharp, defiant smell. A garden grown not for the table, but to bind the restless where they belong. Travelers spoke of this obsession too, wandering merchants who brought silk and stories in equal measure. In candlelit inns, they'd brag about villages deep in the Carpathians where garlic hung in thick braids over every barn door, every stable, every church gate. A merchant would lean in close, breath thick with ale, and whisper. They say a single clove under your pillow will keep the devil from whispering in your ear. And maybe you'd laugh until the fire burned low and the rafters creaked in the wind. Then you'd wonder if you shouldn't have tucked one beneath your own straw pallet, just in case. The smell must have been everywhere, soaked into wool cloaks, woven into straw bedding. Trailing behind villagers when they gathered in the chapel from Massachusetts, imagine the priest's sigh as the congregation knelt. A hush of garlic breath rising with each Ave Maria. Faith and folklore swirling together, pungent and inseparable. Did it work? Who's to say? Maybe the vampires stayed in their graves because of the iron chains and the stakes and the prayers. Or maybe they stayed because no spirit, however thirsty, could bear to press its lips to a neck reeking of crushed cloves and brine. Sometimes the simplest shield is the one that makes you gag first. Picture the children drifting to sleep, tiny cloves tied around their necks with rough twine, the smell clinging to their hair. Their mothers stroke their foreheads, hum old lullabies that taste faintly of fear. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters and the dog whines low by the door. But the garlic hangs heavy above the hearth, its shadow dancing on the soot-streaked walls like a promise. Not tonight. Not tonight. And you, here with me, curled under your blanket. You can almost smell it too, can't you? That biting tang in the back of your throat, the ghost of it woven through your dreams. But you're safe. You don't need a clove under your pillow, not while these old stories keep watch. So breathe deep. Let the sharp scent drift past you, replaced by the warm hush of a world kept at bay by superstition and stubborn hope. The garlic remains, even when the candles gutter out. Next, we'll trace the other defenses hammered into the soil. Iron, stakes, and ash, each a desperate attempt to nail the dead in place when garlic alone wasn't enough. I'll keep the lantern lit for you. Let's keep walking. Next, let's walk to the edge of the graveyard again, boots sinking into that familiar sour mud. The frost crunches underfoot. Somewhere behind you, the last candles gutter out in tiny cottages, their doors bolted and hinges slick with garlic oil. But here, in the hush of the churchyard, a different kind of protection waits, heavier, colder. Iron, wood, ash. You see, to these villagers, garlic was just the first defense, a smell to make the dead wrinkle their noses, if the dead still had noses to wrinkle. But iron was the true keeper of the grave, a charm forged by the blacksmith's hammer, blessed by superstition more than any priest's hand. Picture it, a young man kneeling at the edge of fresh mound. He's still pale from burying his mother only 3 nights before. Now he fumbles with an iron spike, really just an old nail, stolen from a barn door, his hand shaking so badly he drops it twice before he dares press it against the damp soil. His father stands behind him, lips thin, eyes fixed on the moon, rising like a silver coin over the lopsided steeple. Iron, they believe, traps evil, pins it to the earth like a beetle beneath glass. And so they hammer nails through the coffin lid, not just to keep it shut, but to make sure what's inside stays there. Some drive iron bars right through the heart, a grim punctuation mark on a life already ended. And then there are the stakes. Imagine the rough sound of wood scraping against wood as a stake is cut in haste from an elder tree. They say elder's wood is good for this work, that it carries something the dead can't abide. The stake is honed to a point by calloused hands, the blade of a small knife winking in the moonlight. They stand around the coffin, each breath puffing mist into the cold air, while the eldest says the words, "Better split the heart than have it feed again." Picture the moment the stake goes in, a dull, wet sound. Not the clean crack of a tree branch snapping, but something softer, worse. The young man looks away, while burning the back of his throat. But when it's done, he stands straighter, as if the weight on his shoulders has sunk into the earth with the splintered wood. Sometimes they don't stop there. Ash comes next. Not the corpse's ashes, not yet. First they scatter ash from the hearth around the grave's edge, making a ring they believe spirits can't cross. Ash is the memory of fire, and fire is the one thing the dead cannot bear. It's a final fence, drawn with hands so cold they lose all feeling by the time they're done. In some villages, they go further still. They bury the corpse at a crossroads, a place where roads tangle like the threads of fate itself. They believe that if the dead should rise, it will lose its way at that fork, pacing in circles until dawn bleaches its hunger back to dust. It's a cruel mercy, but mercy all the same. Iron, stakes, and ash, They're so heavy with fear, you can almost taste the metal on your tongue. Feel the splinters at the edge of your palm. But there's also a strange comfort here, don't you think? These tools are so real, so ordinary. Not words, not prayers, not the slippery promise of heaven or hell. Just rust and splinters and soot. Things a man can hold in his hand when the night scratches at the shutters. Now picture the graveyard once the work is done. The villagers stand in a loose ring, heads bent, eyes sliding anywhere but toward the fresh mound. The stake is buried deep now, the iron nails hammered through the lid like stitches in a wound that refuses to close. The circle of ash glows faintly under the pale wash of the moon. They don't linger long. There's nothing left to say once the dirt is patted down, once the prayers trail off into sighs. They gather their tools, the hammer slick with sweat, the knife crusted with wood shavings, and shuffle home along the path where brambles tug at their cloaks like small, cold hands. Back in their cottages, they hang the hammer above the hearth, blade resting on the lintel, a secret promise to themselves. If he comes back, we'll do it again. The children sleep curled up beneath rough wool blankets. The mother strokes the dog's ears where he lies watchful by the door, and the father sits in the flicker of the hearth's final coals, eyes fixed on the shadows that never quite stay still. And you, drifting here with me in this half, dream where iron never rusts and stakes never splinter. You can almost hear the hush of wind through the graveyard grass, the faint hiss of ash stirred by a fox slipping between stones. But no footsteps claw their way up from the earth tonight. The iron holds, the wood holds, fear holds, and so does hope. So breathe deeper. Let the rust settle. Let the stakes stay buried. The villagers did all they could, and for tonight, that's enough. Next, we'll wander to the village inn, where travelers' tales spill out over warm ale. Stories carried across mountains and rivers, each darker than the last, feeding the fear that no grave anywhere stays quiet forever. Keep your eyes half closed. The road ahead is long, and the stories never end. Next, drift away from the graveyard's frostbitten hush for a while. Step off the muddy lane, past the bramble hedge snagging your cloak, and slip through the heavy door of the village inn. That crooked wooden box of stale ale and half-kept secrets. Inside, the air is thick with smoke and warmth, the kind that sticks to your skin like an old memory. There's the hiss of fat in the hearth, the soft clunk of tankards knocking together, the crackle of old logs that spit sap into the flames. This is where stories grow legs, where rumors pick up a cloak and boots and wander far beyond the fields they were born in. Picture the merchant, boots muddy from 10 days' ride, fur hat shedding snowflakes onto the rushes strewn across the floor. His cloak is too fine for this backwater. His ring flashes gold when he wipes the foam from his mouth. But the villagers let him talk. They always do. A traveler sees things they'd rather not. And sometimes that's exactly the sort of horror you pay for with a mug of ale and a wary ear. He leans close to the fire, voice low but sticky enough to catch every ear. In my homeland, he says, dragging the words out so the children in the corner press closer to their mothers, we do not bury our dead in the churchyard, not the restless ones. He tells of a village tucked deep in pine forests, with a snowpacks so thick it cracks roofs in half by February's end, where one winter a hunter died alone, found frozen at the edge of a clearing, lips black, eyes open to the bleeding dawn. They buried him by the creek, wrapped in wolf pelts. But weeks later, children woke with scratches on the shutters. Hens went missing, goats bled dry behind locked gates. The tracks led back, always back, to that lonely grave under the trees. A stake wasn't enough. The merchant says, voice growing softer, the log spitting tiny sparks onto his boots. They had to dig him up 3 times. The first, they found the body turned over, hands clawing at the lid. The second, the mouth was stained dark, thick as molasses. The third, he lets the word hang there like smoke. They found nothing at all, just an empty box, and a trail in the snow that vanished into the black woods. A hush settles around the hearth. Someone coughs, just to remind themselves they're still alive, still warm. A man crosses himself so fast he nearly knocks over his mug. Then another voice, the stable boy maybe, voice raw from cold nights, bedding down with the horses, pipes up, "But that's just your folk up north, isn't it? The real vampires, they're in the east by the old castles." He speaks of Transylvania as though he's seen it, though he's never wandered more than 10 miles from this muddy yard. He spins out half, remembered words, strigoi, moroi, names that taste foreign and dangerous, like biting down on a clove you didn't know was in the stew. The merchant humors him. He nods, sloshes ale onto the floorboards, flicks a glance toward the hearth as though he expects to see eyes staring back from the shadows. "Yes," he says, "there are castles older than any church, perched on mountains that drink clouds for breakfast. They say in those halls, whole families lived and died without ever setting foot in the sun. And when they were buried, the stones groaned under their coffins. People hear them still, weeping under the flagstones. You can feel the stories tightening around the room like a noose, a warmth that pinches more than it soothes. These villagers, they dig up their own kin without blinking. But the idea of a place where the earth itself keeps its dead hungry, that's the sort of dread that pries open even the most bolted door in the mind. Outside, the wind slaps against the shutters as if to remind them. The road between here and there is never truly empty. Tales cross borders like fleas on a wolf's back, carried by traders, minstrels, soldiers with more scars than stories to explain them. And each telling grows teeth. One village adds a stake, another a chain, another a black dog that circles the grave 3 times before howling at the moon. Before the night is done, the merchant finishes his ale, his gold ring catching the firelight like a mocking grin. He stands, shrugs in his fur cloak, and promises he'll return come spring, if the roads don't swallow him first. The villagers nod, half grateful to see him go, half sorry to watch their nightmares slip back into the cold. But they carry his words home, clutched tight as any talisman. A mother hums a charm under her breath while she tucks her child in, slips a fresh braid of garlic under the pillow. A father peers out at the graveyard, the moonlight skimming the snow, and imagines footprints that might not be there in the morning. And you, drifting in this flicker of torchlight, this rustle of cloaks and low, fearful laughter. You can almost feel the chill of the traveler's tale settling on your skin. But here, it's just a story. Just smoke and ale and old secrets pass from mouth to mouth, like coins too tarnished to spend. So breathe easy. Let the echoes fade behind the creaking shutters. The merchant is gone. The fire is low. But the stories he carried, they're still here, tucked under your blanket like a promise. That tomorrow, the road will open again and new monsters will slip through. Next, let's listen to the beasts of the night, the wolves, the bats, and all those creatures blamed when fear needed a face in the dark. Stay with me. We're not done yet. The night is long, but so is the telling. Next, let's slip our boots back into the snow outside the inn's warm walls. The door creaks shut behind us, the stories and the ale trailing off into a hush. Now it's just the night again, the road winding out through bare trees, the moon hanging too low, too bright. And somewhere out there, past the churchyard, beyond the fields, the beasts of the dark are waiting, wearing old fears like a second pelt. Picture the wolf first, always the wolf. its eyes like twin coals peering through the underbrush, its breath a curl of steam in the brittle air. To these villagers, the wolf is more than hunger and fur and fangs. It's a shadow given flesh, a messenger between the restless dead and the living too stubborn to stay indoors when the howling starts. Imagine the children pulling their blankets tight up to their chins as the howls drift through the timber walls. There's something in the sound that stirs a memory older than any bedtime tale, a reminder that once, not so long ago, man and wolf circled each other at the edge of the same dying fire. The wolf takes the blame easily, for missing sheep, for footprints near a grave that look just human enough to make a man question what he saw. And then there's the bat, smaller, slyer, slipping through cracks in the shutters like spilled ink. They're not the leathery monsters we dream of today. Back then, a bat was a thief of sleep, a whisperer of dread. Folk would swear they saw one flit from the mouth of a newly dug grave, wings slick with the damp of turned soil. It made sense, didn't it? If something must carry the vampire's soul out into the night, let it be this tiny, velvet ghost. Picture a woman, old Marta again, hunched in her shawl, squinting at the barn rafters where a bat dangles upside down. She mutters a curse under her breath, crosses herself, then spits 3 times to break the evil's hold. In the next room, a child wakes with blood at the corner of his lip, a bitten tongue, perhaps, or a fever blister. From the hush of gossip, it's the bat they blame. It feeds on him while we sleep, they say. It carries the grave's hunger with it. It's not just wolves and bats, either. Ravens, black dogs, barn owls with their pale, uncanny eyes, all swept up into this web of suspicion. Anything that prowls the edge of lamplight, that croaks or howls or flits on silent wings, becomes an accomplice to the restless dead. If you see an owl perched on a gravestone, you turn your coat inside out and walk home backward. They say, confuse the spirit that rides its feathers. And when these creatures die, sometimes they're buried with the same care or the same cruelty as a suspected vampire. A black dog found dead at the church gate might be dragged into the woods, staked to the frozen ground with an iron spike through its heart. A bat, if caught alive, might be nailed to the door of a barn. A grim little scarecrow meant to warn off whatever sickness it carries in those tiny bones. Cruel, yes, but fear twists even kindness into something sharp. Picture the villagers gathered at dusk, listening for the first howl on the wind. They clutch garlic beads, iron nails in pockets, and their eyes flick to the tree line, half hoping, half dreading that the glint they see is just a wolf's eyes and not something worse. Better the beast you know than the one that looks like your brother, pale and grinning in the moonlight. And here's the curious part. Sometimes the beast became part of the story in more tender ways, too. Old folk tales tell of wolves who guard the graveyard gates, chasing off spirits before they can slip between stones. Bats that flap around a cottage, but never roost there, a sign that the family inside has nothing to fear from the restless dark. Even the black dog, with its spine like a bow and eyes like coal, was said to pace the lane between the village and the church, snarling at any soul that dared rise too soon. So blame them they did, but love them a little too, because fear, you see, needs a face. A howl in the night is easier to bear than the thought that your father might scratch at your window with cold, torn nails. Better the wolf. Better the bat. Better anything that doesn't wear your own name on its dead lips. And you, tucked under your blanket here with me, hearing the echo of distant howls, you're safe from their shadows tonight. No wolf prowls your door. No bat scratches at your shutter. They're only memories now, pressed between the pages of old tales like dried herbs that still sting the tongue. So close your eyes if you'd like. Let the beasts slip back into the forest, the rafters, the crooked lane. They've done their part, carrying your fear for you. The dead may yet stir, but for tonight, the fur and the wings hold the secret tight. Next, we'll see where blame turns cruelest. The village which, the healer, the outcast woman who always seemed to know when someone was about to die. A scapegoat for what everyone feared but dared not name. I'll be here. The howls stay outside. Let's keep going. Next, picture the village just before dawn, when the wind tastes like iron and the chickens rustle restless in their coops. It's the hour when even the bravest souls pull their blankets up over their ears. The hush just before the cockerel crows, when the darkness feels thick enough to press a hand to your throat. In that hush, it's easier to wonder, what if all this, the grave scratching, the blood at the mouth, the shriveled cattle, and the child who won't wake, isn't just the work of the restless dead? What if someone alive keeps the door between worlds ajar? And so the villagers who've already blamed the wolf and the bat and the crooked tree roots turn their eyes to the next suspect. The woman at the edge of the village, the one who knows too much about herbs, too much about birth and blood, and the ways a body can be coaxed back from fever, or not. Picture her cottage, small, stooped under the weight of its own thatch. Herbs hang in bunches from the beams. Rosemary, yarrow, wormwood, their bitter scents clinging to her shawl like a ghost's breath. Old Marta, maybe, or some other name lost to parish ledgers and whispered fear. She's the one they come to by daylight. All hush, hush, and hat in hand. Please, can you help the baby breathe? Please, can you ease the pain in my bones? But when the moon drags itself overhead and the dogs growl at the door, she becomes something else entirely. Imagine the knock at her door, 3 hard raps like iron on oak. She pulls her shawl tight, steps outside into the bite of the wind, and finds half the village waiting. Their faces pinched with sleeplessness, their eyes flicking past her shoulder, looking for shadows behind her. A mother stands at the front, hair wild, eyes rimmed red, clutching a scrap of linen with a few smears of blood that will never wash clean. "You knew," she whispers. Her voice trembles like a string pulled too tight. "You said my boy would live, but you knew. It doesn't matter that the boy was too weak to see winter. It doesn't matter that Marta held his hand until he stilled, that she prayed louder than the priest when the child coughed up his last ragged breath. Grief demands an answer, a target for the fear that creeps in when garlic strings and iron stakes fail to keep the shadows at bay. So they search her cottage, scatter her bundles of dried herbs across the dirt floor, overturn the small chest where she keeps her meager coins and bits of string. If they find a dead toad, a bone bundle, a wax doll stuck with pins, even better. Proof enough. If they don't, they'll make do with the smell of bitter roots and the wild glint in her eye when she hisses at them to leave. Picture them dragging her to the churchyard under a sky bruised purple with dawn. The priest stands by, his prayers half-hearted, his eyes fixed on the churned graves he can't keep closed. He does nothing because fear feeds on silence as much as superstition. And maybe, in some secret corner of his heart, he wonders if Marta really did barter with the restless dead. They shout at her to confess. Sometimes she does. Sometimes she spits at their boots instead, her words curling up like steam in the cold air. I kept your babies breathing when you would have let them drown in fever. I laid your dead to rest when you were too scared to touch them. And now you blame me because they won't lie still. It doesn't matter. She is the scapegoat, the vessel for every sin they dare not name. She becomes the reason graves open, why blood stains the shroud, why the cattle go dry, and the milk sours in the pail. She is fear made flesh, and fear must be cut out before it rots the village from within. If they are merciful, and mercy is a thin thing in these dark hours, they banish her to the woods. They tear down her cottage, Burn her herbs, scatter her cat if she has one. But the smell of her fire lingers for weeks. The rustle of her name floats through the bramble hedge at night when the wind is high. Some swear they see her shape slip between the trees, bones wrapped in her ragged shawl, muttering curses that twist the dead deeper into their graves. And if they're not merciful, well, you know how those stories end. A stake isn't only for the dead. Sometimes it's driven through the living, too. Sometimes the pyre smokes with more than poppy seeds and shrouds, and the ashes swirl up to mingle with the ghost that started it all, a bitter sacrifice to a fear that never feels sated. Strange, isn't it? How the village that fears its dead so deeply will always find a living soul to shoulder that dread, someone to drive into the wild with blame clinging to her like brambles to a hem. And you, here with me, curled where no mob can knock at your door, you're safe. You can let the echoes of the old woman's footsteps fade into the forest. You don't need her potions or her curses tonight. The restless dead stay tucked in their stories, and the scapegoat sleeps at last under the hush of your blanket. So breathe easy. Let the torchlight sputter out behind your lids. The wind carries the ashes away, far from your dreams. Next, we'll wander back to the graveyard again, but this time to the strange crossroad burials, where superstition and desperation tangled their roots into the dirt, hoping that no spirit could ever find its way home. Rest your eyes, the tale is waiting. Next, let's leave behind the inn's warmth and the witch's charred doorway. Follow me out to where the path splits in two, a rough track cleaving the heath, puddles of moonlight caught in every rut and hollow. This is the crossroads, just a patch of mud and stone under a bruised sky. Yet for the old villagers it was something more, a place where the world seems frayed, where lost things might wander forever. Imagine a restless corpse that would not lie still. They tried everything. Garlic knotted around the coffin like garlands, iron driven through the chest, a stake wedged deep into the heart's soft cradle. And yet the dog still howled at the door. The window rattled with a scratching that sounded like fingernails on glass. Fear thickens when hope dries up, so they dig the grave one last time, haul the body out beneath the cold snarl of dawn, and carry it to the nearest place where every road forgets which way is home. Picture that grim procession, lanterns bobbing along the track, breath steaming from men's mouths as they trudge through frozen puddles. No priest this time. The church's blessing stops at the church gate. Out here, it's all old magic, half-whispered charms, and the weight of centuries pressing down on shoulders already bent from grief. At the crossroads, they dig fast because superstition says the longer you linger, the more the spirit catches wind of your fear. The soil is stubborn, heavy with pebbles and roots that tug at the spade like dead hands. Someone mutters a prayer, or maybe it's just a bargain. Stay here, wanderer. Let the forks confuse you until the cock crows. They bury the corpse face down, a cruel trick for a soul already lost. The idea is simple and terrible. If the dead do claw free, they'll dig downward, deeper into the earth instead of up toward the waking world. Some bind the legs at the ankles, tie the wrists and the small of the back, a mockery of sleep that ensures the corpse stays tangled in its own limbs if it stirs. Then comes the iron spike, a final insult and a final mercy. They drive it through the chest or the neck, pinning flesh to soil, a nail in the coffin's heart when the coffin is long gone. It makes a sound that shivers down the spine, that dull thud of iron splitting bone that the men will hear again when they stir broth at the hearth, when they split wood for the winter fire. Once the earth is patted down, rough, hurried, no neat mound, no carved stone to mark it, they scatter ash or salt or poppy seeds across the grave. It's a leftover whisper of faith, or maybe just a superstition so old they no longer remember why they do it. Some stand a crude post at the head, a bit of splintered wood, no name carved in. After all, no one wants to remember who lies here. That's the point. Let the crossroads swallow the name, the face, the trail home. Can you see them now? The men glance down each road in turn, left, right, straight ahead. They shift their boots in the mud, trying to feel which path points toward warmth and which one carries the echo of the thing they just buried. One man tosses a handful of coins at the grave's edge, a bribe to keep the soul too busy counting to rise and knock on his door. The wind catches the clink of metal and scatters it into the hedgerow. Strange, isn't it? The crossroads hold such power because they belong to no one. They're not a field, not a hearth, not the churchyard soil that pretends to be holy. They're just a question written into the earth. Which way now? And that question keeps the dead circling under the frost, pacing paths that never lead home, wearing their hunger down into something that looks almost like peace. And yet, the villagers still shiver when they pass by at dusk. They quicken their step, pull their cloaks tight. If a horse balks at the crossroads, no one scolds it. They just let it turn, nose towards safer ground. Children dare each other to stand there after dark, to toss a stone onto the grave, to listen for the soft whisper that the wind might carry back. I'm still here. Sometimes, they say, the restless don't settle. The crossroads are wide, the roads longer than any dream. On certain nights, the lanterns swing at the far end of the lane, and the scratching comes back. But by then, the men have forgotten whose bones they buried at the fork. The body has no name, only a shadow that slips between stories, changing shape to suit the next fireside tale. And you, drifting here at my side, breathing easy where no road forks beneath your feet. You're safe. No restless soul to confuse your door with its old home. No crossroads to tangle your steps. The wind might rattle the shutter, but it carries no footprints with it tonight. So close your eyes a little heavier, if you'd like. Let the buried wander in their endless circles, roads spinning out like veins beneath frozen soil. They won't find their way to your dreams. Not while you rest here, warm and wrapped in this old, sleepy telling. Next, we'll slip inside the mind of a grave digger himself. The man who knows each mound, each whisper, each secret under the dirt. The one who stands closest to the restless, listening for the moment when earth and flesh speak back. Stay here. We're almost there. Next, let's stand at the edge of the graveyard one last time, but not with a lantern or a stake, not with garlic stuffed in our pockets or a crucifix clutched to our chest. No, tonight we stand beside the one man who walks these crooked rows every day with no fear at all, the grave digger. Picture him now. They call him Old Jurgen, or maybe it's Peter, or Miko, or any name that sounds tired enough to match the stoop of his shoulders. He's a shape that drifts from the first thaw of spring to the hard crust of winter frost, boots sunk ankle deep in the graveyard's soft belly. The priest might hold the keys to the chapel, but it's the digger who holds the keys to the soil. Jurgen's spade is older than he is. Its handle polished smooth by a lifetime of hands. Its blade nicked and pitted where it's found more than just roots and stones. He knows every plot, every hidden bone. The parish keeps a ledger, all neat names and dates in Latin no one reads. Jurgen's ledger lives in his spine. Every fresh mound another knot that aches when rain is coming. Picture him at dawn, lantern guttering, breath ghosting out in slow puffs. He hums to himself while he works, some old tune that's less him than lullaby. When the dirt gives way with a wet sigh, he listens. He listens because the earth sometimes speaks back. A shift here, a hollow there, a crack that echoes like a whisper in an empty room. The villagers pretend not to see him. They pass him on the path, eyes sliding sideways, muttering a hasty blessing under their breath. They fear him just a little, not because he's done anything wrong, but because he lives so close to what they dread most. He's the last man to touch their fathers, their daughters, their husbands, to pat the soil down like tucking a child into bed. Who wouldn't feel uneasy knowing one man holds so many secrets under his ragged coat? Sometimes they corner him behind the church, tugging at his sleeve when no one's looking. Jürgen, did you hear it? Scratching. He shrugs. Maybe yes, maybe no. What good does it do to admit the truth? That sometimes, when the moon is new and the owls are silent, he swears he feels the soil shift under his boots, like something beneath it rolling over in its restless sleep. He could tell them stories, if he wanted, of coffins cracked open where the corpse turned face down. Not from trickery, but from some final twitch the dead take when no one's watching. Of mouths that gape with a smear of black liquid that's not blood, but looks close enough to make a man spit 3 times and cross himself twice. Of a body buried with its eyes open, dirt dusting the lashes like sleep that never quite came. He knows the rituals better than the priest does. He's buried iron stakes through chests when the family asked for it. Just to be safe, Jürgen. You understand. He's scattered poppy seeds, laid a sickle blade across a throat that would never draw breath again. And once, he swears it, though the telling cracks his voice. He dug up a man 3 times in one winter, each time finding the body turned, the shroud clawed open at the chest. He'd never say so out loud, but in the bottom of his lungs he half believes it. The earth gets hungry too, yet for all that, he isn't afraid. Picture him leaning on his spade at dusk, coat collar turned up against the wind. He says good night to the stones, knows each one by the lean of its shoulders, the way the moss creeps along the names. He hums to the mounds, a low, croaking tune, like a man comforting an old friend who never really leaves. He sleeps better than any priest, any merchant, any mother clutching garlic beads behind her shutter. Because here's the thing, Jürgen understands what the others don't. The fear is never really about the dead. It's about the living, about the memories and regrets that linger long after the last nail is hammered in. The restless dead are just stories the living tell themselves, so they don't have to look too close at the ache that lives in their own marrow. So he digs. He hums. He pats the soil smooth with the flat of his spade, like pressing a quilt over a restless sleeper. And when the villagers huddle behind the churchyard gate, whispering about scratching, about dogs howling, about pale faces at the window, Jürgen just nods. He'll be there come morning, boots sinking in his soft soil again. And you, safe here with me, your feet dry while Jürgen's are forever damp. You can feel it, can't you? That strange comfort that comes from knowing there's someone out there who's not afraid to stand at the threshold between this world and whatever waits in the roots below. So close your eyes. Let the sound of the spade scraping the earth settle in your bones like a lullaby. The grave digger keeps watch for you, all secrets, all restless dreams, tucked back under the soil with a soft, final pat. Next, we'll lift our gaze to the stories carved in a stone, old epitaphs that whisper more than they promise, each one an echo of the fear and hope the living leave behind. Stay warm. There's always one more story buried just below the surface. Next, let's stand inside the graveyard one last time, but not to dig, not to hammer in stakes or scatter ash to the wind. Tonight we're here just to read, to run our fingers over the cold hum of words carved in a stone, to listen for what the living hope to hush and what they accidentally let slip through the cracks. Picture the stones, leaning crooked, green with lichen that blooms thick in the damp places where sunlight never quite dries the moss. Some stand straight, proud, even, letters deep and clear like a boast. Here lies Thomas, father, husband, honest man. Others are so worn that only the ghost of a name lingers. A swirl of lines you might mistake for ivy until you touch it and feel the chisels bite beneath your palm. Each epitaph is a promise that death was the end of things, the final full stop that keeps the sleeper pinned beneath the soil. At rest, they say, peace be upon him. Sleep in God's light. But scratch at those words. Lean in so close your breath fogs the stone, and you'll hear the tiny tremble of doubt. Because if the living were so certain the dead lay quiet, why whisper all these words into the stone at all? Picture old Marta's grave. Yes, her again, because every village has a Marta, don't they? Hers is a simple slab of shale, rough around the edges, the words chipped by a hand that didn't care for poetry. God forgive her. Nothing more. A lifetime of herbs and secrets, of children saved and curses muttered, summed up in 3 words that sound like a plea made too late. Sometimes the village boys dare each other to run a finger across her name on a moonless night. They say it feels warm, though the frost still creeps around their boots. Or imagine the wealthy merchant's stone, tall, proud, flanked by iron railings that rust faster than prayers fade. His epitaph runs long, a litany of virtues carved deep enough to last a century. Beloved benefactor, pious husband, friend to all. But the villagers remember how his sons buried him with a mouthful of garlic cloves, and how the grave digger found iron spikes driven through his shroud just in case. The stone brags of goodness. The soil remembers the fear. Some stones carry small symbols, a skull and crossbones, a sickle blade, a single rough stake. Marks that mean nothing to priests, but everything to a neighbor who lies awake at night, listening for scratching at the window. They're tiny bargains made in stone. Stay where you lie. Sleep deep. Don't come knocking. And sometimes there's nothing at all. A patch of grass where a marker should be. The grave at the crossroads never bears a name, never claims a date. The villagers want to forget or pretend they never knew. That silence is its own epitaph, heavy as iron yet light enough to drift through generations like wood smoke onto the rafters. Picture the grave digger, Jurgen, passing through at dawn. He knows every word, every lie, every hope chipped into the stones. He hums as he moves among them, fingers brushing the moss. He could tell you whose epitaph was written by a trembling widow, which stone was paid for with borrowed coins, which was set up by children who had more faith in iron than in Latin. But he doesn't. The stones whisper enough on their own. Sometimes he finds a pebble laid on a headstone, a small token that says, I remember, or a bit of garlic tucked behind a cracked slab, half-rotten but still sharp enough to sting the air. The living forget nothing when it comes to fear. They press their worries into the earth and hope the stone holds the secret shut. Now, imagine standing there, just at the edge of sleep, tracing a fingertip through the grooves of those old letters. Feel the grit of centuries under your skin, the stories buried deeper than bones, deeper than any stake ever could reach. Epitaphs are lullabies for the anxious, promises whispered to calm the scratching at the shutters. At rest, at peace, stay down. And you, here in your warm, safe bed, you don't need a stone to hold your fear. The only epitaph you need tonight is the hush of your breath, the soft drum of your heartbeat that tells you you're here. You're warm. No restless soul claws at your window. So close your eyes a little heavier now. Let the mossy words fade behind your eyelids. The grave digger has read them all, hummed them into the earth like seeds that never sprout. The dead sleep, at least for now, and the stones keep watch. Next, we'll drift into the legends that survived the centuries. How these tales crossed borders and centuries, blossoming into the vampire myths we still carry like a splinter in our collective mind. Don't worry, there's enough warmth in the telling to keep the chill at bay. Stay close. Next, let's stand at the edge of the village for the last time, boots pressed into the muddy lane that wanders beyond the crooked gate, out into fields that know more stories than any man ever will. Here, the road doesn't end. It meanders from one camel-lit cottage to the next, over mountains, through bramble forests, across rivers that carry whispers like driftwood. Picture it, a traveling merchant, saddle creaking under the weight of cheap cloth and rarer things, salt, beads, secrets. He stops at the first inn, trades a bolt of coarse wool for a mug of thin ale, and by the time the mug is empty, he spun the tale of a village far east where a man buried in spring was found fresh as a daisy come winter, mouth ruddy, eyes cracked open like the first thaw. They staked him through the heart, he says, breath warm with drink. Then they staked him again, just to be sure. By dawn, the stable boy remembers it differently. Now the man's hair was red as fox fur, his fingers clawed, his coffin found splintered from within. By the next village, the tale sprouts new roots, garlic around the grave, iron nails through the chest, a dog that howled 3 nights in a row before the men dug him up. And so the story slithers on, gathering details like brambles clinging to a woolen cloak. Across the border, another tongue gives the fear a name, Strigoi, Nosferatu, Moroi, Wamper. Each word tastes different on the tongue, but gnaws at the same old ache, that death might not be enough to keep a sinner's hunger pinned beneath the earth. The monks write warnings in the margins of dusty chronicles. Such demons rise when burial rites are rushed. They scold in spidery Latin, but behind closed doors, they scatter poppy seeds under their pillows just like the villagers do. And the stories grow teeth sharper than any wolf's. Picture the peasant telling his son about the nobleman who drank his people dry. A cruelty so bottomless the earth refused to keep him. They say his castle windows glowed red long after his death, that the wind howling down his tower steps sounded too much like laughter. Now imagine a scholar in a camel-lit cell in Prague, scribbling by guttering flame. He listens to a pilgrim's tale about a corpse so bloated with stolen blood its shroud burst like rotted fruit. He sets down the quill, stares at the flame, and for a moment he almost believes. The parchment crackles as if it wants to confess too. Then there's the poet, the pamphlet maker, the traveling priest with his battered satchel of relics. Each one carries the story another mile. By the time it reaches the ports and crosses the sea, the graveyard vampire has grown a cloak, a castle, the face of a count who never quite closes his eyes. Garlic, stakes, crossroads, all folded into silk and ink, dressed up for parlors and printed pages. Strange, isn't it? How the stories that began in the hush of frostbitten graveyards now fill the warm glow of libraries. The flicker of theater lanterns, the pages of novels pressed into eager hands. They're safer now, these tales, pinned between covers, tamed by printing presses. But they still carry that same sour bite of dread, the curl of a dog's howl at midnight, the hush of dirt falling back onto a coffin lid. Some scholars will tell you these legends are just symbols of fear of disease, of sin, of lust that refuses to die. And maybe they're right. But deep down, there's a simpler truth. Stories live because fear does. We dress it up, we name it, we bury it under polished marble or pages of fiction. But it stirs whenever we hear the tap, tap, tap at the window, the creak of a branch that sounds too much like a footstep in the dark. Now picture the villagers' children, grown now, telling their own children about the dead who never sleep. The tales shrink and stretch, twist with each retelling. A father shakes his head. Nonsense, he mutters, but later that night he nails the shutter closed just the same. The garlic braid hangs from the beam, half rotten but never thrown away. The graveyard fence stays mended, the paths to the crossroads kept clear just in case. And you, here with me, safe under your blanket while the stories coil through your thoughts. You can feel it too, can't you? That flicker in your ribs that says maybe, just maybe, not every stake holds fast. Not every road stays empty. Not every grave lies still. But tonight, it's only a story. A hush between us, warm as a candle flame held in cupped palms. The roads can twist as they will. The wolves can howl. The bats can flit. The graves can sigh in their sleep. They won't find you here. You've done your part. Listened, wondered, remembered. That's enough to keep the old fears sated for now. So breathe deep. Let the legends slide back into the dark like a fox in a bramble. The graves are quiet. The crossroads lie still. The vampire, if he lingers at all, is only a shadow tucked beneath your dreams. Rest easy, my friend. There's nothing more to fear tonight. The old stories have wandered far enough.